The photographs spilled across the concrete floor like fallen leaves, thousands of them. And Marcus Chen's hands were shaking as he picked up the first one. A young woman in a wedding dress from what looked like the 1980s, her smile so bright it seemed to glow even through 4 decades of darkness. Beneath the photo box, wrapped in a deteriorating blanket, sat a leather briefcase. And when the rusted latches finally gave way with a crack that echoed through the storage unit, bundles of cash tumbled out. 50s and hundreds, rubber-banded and yellowed. More money than Marcus had seen in his entire 63 years. His wife Lynn gasped behind him, her arthritic fingers clutching his shoulder. And for a moment, neither of them could breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at what 40 years of someone else's life had become. Forgotten, abandoned, and now impossibly theirs. Wait, before you see what's inside. If this story already has your heart pounding, tell us where you're watching from. When forgotten boxes open, when second chances hide under dust and debt, subscribe and stay close. You'll never guess what's been left behind. Now, back to the lock clicking open. Marcus had bought the unit for $300 that morning, their last $300 actually, the remnants of his final unemployment check before the extensions ran out. The auctioneer had been bored, rattling through his spiel to a crowd of maybe 8 people in the Sacramento heat, and when he'd gotten to Unit 847, he'd barely glanced at the contents visible through the half-open door. "Looks like papers, boxes, old furniture," he drawled. Lynn had pulled at Marcus's elbow. "We can't," she'd whispered. "That's the rent money." But Marcus had seen something the others hadn't, or maybe he'd just been desperate enough to gamble. Through the gap in the door, he'd spotted what looked like antique frames, the kind with real wood and hand-carved corners. His grandfather had been a furniture maker in Guangzhou, and even after 50 years in America, Marcus could still recognize quality craftsmanship. If those frames were real, if they were sellable, 300 might turn into 1,000. "250, had called out, his voice cracking. The auctioneer had pointed at him with the gavel. "250 to the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 3? Silence. The crowd was already moving toward the next unit. "Sold for $250. Pay up front, clean it out by Sunday." Now, 6 hours later, Marcus sat on the concrete floor surrounded by the evidence of his desperation, and possibly his salvation. The briefcase had contained at least $20,000, maybe more. He was afraid to count it, afraid to touch it, afraid that touching it would make it real, and making it real would mean confronting what it meant. Marcus? Lynn's voice was steady, the way it had been through 3 layoffs, 2 foreclosures, and the long slide from middle-class comfort to sleeping on their daughter's couch. "Put it back. Put it back." He looked up at her. This woman who'd married him when they were both 23 and working at the same semiconductor plant. Who'd stood beside him through the tech boom and the tech bust and every boom and bust after. Her face was lined now, her hair more gray than black, but her eyes were the same, clear and unwavering. "Lynn, this is someone else's money." She knelt beside him, her knees popping. "Someone who probably needs it." Marcus wanted to laugh, wanted to cry. It's been 40 years. The unit was abandoned. That's how auctions work. After 3 months of non-payment, the contents become property of whoever buys them. The law says that. Lynn picked up one of the photographs, studied it. "What does your heart say?" That was the problem, wasn't it? His heart said so many things. You're 63 years old, and you've worked since you were 14, and you have nothing to show for it except debt and a daughter who loves you but can't support you forever. It said, "This money could be the difference between dying in dignity and dying on the street." It said, "$300 bought you a miracle. Take it." But his heart also said, "These photographs mean something. This collection means something. Someone spent 40 years building this, and then something happened, something terrible enough that they walked away from tens of thousands of dollars in cash." Marcus set the briefcase aside and reached for the photo box. There had to be 10,000 pictures in there, maybe more. They were organized chronologically, each year separated by index cards with dates written in fading blue ink. He pulled out the earliest card, 1985, the beginning. The photographs from that year showed the same woman from the wedding picture, younger now without the veil, standing beside a man in his 30s with thick glasses and a gentle smile. They were in front of a small house with a sold sign in the yard. There were pictures of them painting walls, planting flowers, sitting on a porch swing. At the bottom of the stack, the man held a camera and the woman was laughing, reaching out to push the lens away. "They were happy," Lynn said softly. She'd moved closer, was looking at the photos over his shoulder. "Look at how they look at each other." The next card read, 1986, first year. More photos. The couple at what looked like a state fair. Christmas morning with a small tree. The woman holding up a tiny pair of baby shoes. In the final photo of that section, she had her hand on a small belly bump, and the man's hand was resting over hers. Marcus's throat tightened. He knew what was coming, could feel it in the way the story was unfolding. He pulled out the 1987 card. The first photo showed the woman in a hospital bed, her face exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. The man stood beside her, his glasses slightly crooked, his smile so wide it looked like it might split his face. The photos that followed showed the baby, a boy, at various stages. First bath, first smile, sleeping in a crib, being held by what looked like grandparents. And then, 20 photos in, there was a picture of the baby in a hospital bed, tubes and wires everywhere, and the parents on either side, their faces hollowed out with fear. Lynn made a small sound. Marcus turned the photo over. On the back, in that same blue ink, "Little Warrior, 3 months old. Doctors say he's strong." The rest of 1987 was hospital photos and home photos, the baby getting bigger, the parents getting thinner. By December, the final photo showed all 3 of them on the couch, the boy, maybe 9 months old now, sitting up and grinning at the camera. The parents pressed close on either side, dark circles under their eyes, but something like hope in their faces. Marcus looked at Lynn, and she was crying. "Keep going," she whispered. 1988 through 1992 passed in a blur of images. First steps, first day of preschool, birthday parties with superhero themes, the boy losing his first tooth, learning to ride a bike. In every photo, the parents were there, teaching, celebrating, holding, loving. The quality of the pictures improved over the years. The man had clearly invested in better cameras. Some of the shots were stunning. The boy backlit by sunset, playing in a fountain, running through autumn leaves. But something else was changing too. In the later photos, the house in the background looked shabbier. The birthday parties got smaller. The boy's clothes in sequential photos were often the same, worn thin. By 1993, the father had lost weight, his clothes hanging loose. The mother's smile had become tight, brittle. The 1994 card. There were fewer photos, and the ones that existed were devastating in their honesty. The boy, maybe 7 or 8 now, in a hospital bed again, this time with an IV port in his chest. The parents in the hallway holding each other, the father's face buried in the mother's shoulder. A photo of medical bills spread across a kitchen table, hundreds of them. A foreclosure notice taped to a door. The boy in home, pale and thin, sitting in a wheelchair with a Game Boy in his lap. And then, near the end of 1994, a photo that made Marcus' breath catch. The 3 of them in front of this very storage facility. The unit door was open behind them, boxes stacked inside. The boy was in the wheelchair giving a thumbs up to the camera. The mother was crouching beside him, her smile forced. The father was taking the picture. Marcus could see the man's reflection in the storage unit's metal frame, his face gaunt, his eyes haunted. "They put their things in storage," Lynn said, "when they lost the house." Marcus pulled out the 1995 card. There were only a dozen photos. The boy in the hospital, looking better, sitting up, laughing at something. The parents in what looked like a small apartment, the walls bare. The boy, walking, actually walking, with the father's hands spotted behind him, ready to catch. A Christmas photo with a tiny tree on a table, the three of them squeezed onto a futon, but the boy was out of the wheelchair, and that seemed to be enough. The final photo showed the mother and son together, both of them making silly faces at the camera, and on the back, "She saved us." But 1996 had no card at all. The photos went directly from December 1995 to January 1997, and when Marcus pulled out that batch, his hands were trembling. The first photo showed only the father and son. They were at what looked like a cemetery, standing in front of a fresh grave with flowers. The boy, maybe 10 now, was leaning against his father's leg, and the father's hand rested on his son's shoulder, both of them staring at the ground. The father looked like he'd aged 20 years. "Oh no," Lynn breathed. "She died?" Marcus turned over the photo. Mary Elizabeth Morrison, 1962 to 1996, loved beyond measure. The photos from 1997 were sparse and painful. The boy and father going through the motions, school events, meals, attempts at normalcy. In every picture, there was an absence that screamed louder than any presence. The house from the early photos was gone. The apartment was gone. In the backgrounds, Marcus could see motels, shelters, the inside of what might have been a car. But what struck him most was what the father had kept photographing. Despite everything, despite losing his home, his wife, his entire life, he'd kept taking pictures of his son. Every birthday, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday. The collection hadn't stopped. If anything, it had intensified, as if the father was trying to document proof that they'd survived, that they were still here, still fighting. The years continued. 1998 showed the boy getting older, hitting adolescence, growing tall and lean. The father still appeared in some photos, timer shots, pictures taken by strangers, but Marcus could see the toll the years had taken. By 2000, the father looked 60, though he was probably only 45. The apartment they were in was small and dark, but the photos on the walls, blown-up versions of pictures from happier years, tried to brighten it. 2001 through 2005 documented the boy's teenage years. High school graduation, where the father sat in the front row with tears streaming down his face. The boy's first day of college, community college, based on the building, where he stood with a backpack and his father's same shy smile. More photos of father and son together, and in these, Marcus could see something shifting. The boy wasn't just being taken care of anymore. In several pictures, he had his arm around his father's shoulders, was holding him up. The 2006 card read, "New Beginning." These photos show the small house, not the original one, but clean and whole. The boy, a young man now, 20-ish, stood in front holding keys. The father beside him looked smaller somehow, frailer, but his smile was genuine. There were photos of them moving in together, painting walls just like in 1985, planting flowers in the yard. But there were also photos of the father in bed, clearly ill. Photos of the son sitting beside him, holding his hand. Photos of medical equipment being moved into the house. Marcus didn't need to be a doctor to recognize the trajectory. The last dated photo was from 2007. Father and son on a couch. The father skeletal now, oxygen tubes in his nose, but both of them laughing at something on TV. On the back, "Still here, still fighting, love you, Dad." After that, the photos had no dates. There were maybe 50 more. The son alone now, graduating from a 4-year university, standing in front of what looked like an office building in business casual clothes, sitting at a desk with a nameplate that Marcus couldn't quite read. Growing older, filling out, becoming a man his parents would have been proud of. The final photo was of the son, middle-aged now, maybe 40, standing in front of a house that Marcus recognized from the earlier pictures. The original house, the one from 1985. He was holding a key and a sold sign, and his eyes were full of tears. On the back, "I bought it back, Dad." Took me 20 years, but I bought our home back. Wish you could see it. Wish Mom could see it. I think about you both every single day. The storage unit payment is set to auto-pay for the next 20 years. Everything's safe. Everything's preserved. When I'm gone, someone will find this and they'll know our story. They'll know we loved each other. They'll know we survived. Love always, James Morrison, 2015. Marcus sat back, the photo slipping from his fingers. The storage unit, this storage unit, had been paid through 2035, but something had happened. James Morrison had paid for 20 years of storage to preserve his family's history, to keep his parents' memory alive, and then… The auto-pay must have failed, Lynn said quietly. She was holding a bank statement she'd found in another box, dated 2024. Look, he changed banks, or maybe the account closed, and he never updated the payment information. So the payments stopped, Marcus continued, the pieces falling into place. The storage company tried to contact him, probably mailed notices to an old address, and when he didn't respond, they auctioned it off. Lynn looked around at the boxes, the furniture, the carefully preserved 40-year collection. After 40 years of his father taking pictures, after 10 years of James paying to keep them safe, all of it sold to strangers for $300. Marcus picked up the briefcase again, looked at the cash inside. $20,000 at least, probably more. The medical bills in another box suggested why James's father had kept so much cash on hand. Maybe he'd learned not to trust banks, or maybe he'd needed money immediately accessible for emergencies. And James, when he'd inherited his father's possessions, had stored the briefcase along with everything else, preserving it exactly as it had been, part of the collection, part of the history. "We need to find him," Lynn said. "Lynn, don't." She stood up, her knees protesting. "Don't you dare say we can't afford to. Don't you dare say we need this money more than we need to do the right thing. I've been married to you for 40 years, Marcus Chen. I know who you are. I know the man your grandfather raced, the man who drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to return a customer's wallet with $12 in it. That man doesn't keep this." Marcus looked down at the photograph, still in his hand. The final one, James standing in front of his reclaimed home. The man had spent 20 years buying back a house his parents had lost to medical debt. He'd paid for 2 decades of storage to keep their memory alive. And now some bank error, some clerical mistake, had cost him everything. But Marcus and Lynn had nothing, less than nothing. They were living on their daughter's charity, watching their daughter sacrifice her own future to take care of them. This money could change that. This money could give them back their dignity. "I don't know if I can," Marcus admitted, and his voice broke on the words. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk away from this." Lynn knelt beside him again, took his face in her weathered hands. "Yes, you can, because that's what love does. It makes you strong enough." Marcus closed his eyes, felt tears slip down his cheeks. He thought about James Morrison, who'd watched his mother die and his father waste away, who'd pulled himself up from nothing to reclaim a piece of his childhood, who'd tried so hard to preserve his family's story that he'd paid for 20 years of storage in advance, never imagining that a simple bank change could undo everything. And he thought about his own father, who'd worked in a factory for 45 years and died with nothing, but had always said, "The measure of a man isn't what he has, it's what he does when he has a choice." Marcus had a choice. He opened his eyes. "Help me pack it up, all of it. We're going to find James Morrison." The search took 3 days. Marcus started with the name on the photo and the business address visible in one of the later pictures. A few phone calls and some internet research at the public library, they couldn't afford home internet, led him to a tech company in San Jose. But when he called, the receptionist told him that James Morrison had left the company 6 months ago. "Do you have a forwarding address?" Marcus asked. "Or a phone number?" "I'm sorry, sir, I can't give out personal information." He tried social media next, but there were hundreds of James Morrisons in California. He paid $2 to use a People Finder website, but the results were overwhelming and mostly outdated. Days passed. Marcus and Lynn returned to the storage unit each day. They had until Sunday to clear it out and spent hours going through the boxes looking for more clues. They found tax returns from the early 2000s, which gave them James's father's full name, Thomas David Morrison. They found medical records that documented a childhood heart condition, the reason for all those hospital stays. They found report cards, awards from elementary school, a college diploma in business administration. They found letters Thomas had written to James but apparently never sent, pages of advice and love and apologies for not being able to provide more. In one letter, dated 2006, Thomas wrote, "I know you blame yourself for the medical bills, for the debt, for everything we lost. But James, you were a child. You were sick. Loving you and fighting for you, that was the privilege of my life. Your mother felt the same way. We never, not for 1 second, regretted the choices we made. You gave us purpose. You gave us joy. You gave us reasons to keep going even when everything else fell apart. Never forget that." Lynn cried when she read it. Marcus had to step outside the storage unit and stand in the hot Sacramento sun, overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd found. This wasn't just a collection. It was a love letter written across 40 years, a testament to what a family could endure and still hold each other up. On the third day, Marcus found a business card in one of the boxes. It was old, the corners bent, but it had James's name and a phone number. The company name was different from the tech firm. This one was called Morrison Digital Solutions. Marcus' hands shook as he dialed. The number was disconnected. He sat down hard on the storage unit floor, the business card crumpling in his fist. They'd been so close, but the trail had gone cold. And Sunday was tomorrow, and if they didn't clear out the unit by then, everything would be hauled to the dump. The storage facility manager had made that clear. "What do we do?" Marcus asked Lynn. "We've tried everything." Lynn was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the boxes and furniture that represented a family's entire history. Then she said, "We don't give up. We take it all home." "Home? Lynn, we don't have a home. We're on Katie's couch." "Then we rent a storage unit of our own, a small one. We put everything here into it, and we keep paying for it until we find James Morrison. Even if it takes months, even if it takes years." Marcus stared at her. That's going to cost money we don't have." "We have money." She pointed at the briefcase. "We borrow from that. We take what we need to rent a unit and keep searching. And when we find him, we give everything back, including whatever we borrowed, with interest." "That's stealing." "No," Lynn's voice was firm. "Stealing is keeping what isn't yours. This is borrowing with the intention to repay. This is doing what we have to do to make things right." Marcus wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because the alternative was loading everything into a dumpster. And he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't do that. Not after reading Thomas's letters. Not after seeing the care with which James had preserved his parents' memory. They rented a small unit at a different storage facility, 5 feet by 5 feet, barely enough to stand, for $90 a month. They took $3,000 from James's briefcase and put it in a separate envelope marked "Borrowed from J. Morrison." Then they spent Friday and Saturday moving everything from Unit 847 to their new unit. The storage facility manager complained about them taking so long, but Marcus slipped him a 50 from the briefcase, and suddenly they had all the time they needed. By Sunday evening, Unit 847 was empty, except for a few pieces of broken furniture that weren't worth saving. Marcus swept the floor, turned off the light, and locked the door for the last time. In his pocket was the key to their new unit. the one that now held 40 years of the Morrison family history. They took the bus back to their daughter Katie's apartment in Stockton. She was working a double shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, had been carrying them financially for 18 months now, so the apartment was empty. Marcus made tea while Lynn sat at the small kitchen table, the photo of James in front of his reclaimed home propped against a napkin holder. "We'll find him," Lynn said. It sounded like a prayer. Marcus nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. James Morrison could be anywhere. California had 40 million people. What if he'd moved out of state? What if he'd gotten married and changed his name? What if, and Marcus hated himself for thinking it, what if something had happened to him? The man would be in his late 50s now. Anything was possible. Katie came home at midnight, exhausted, her scrubs stained with coffee and who knows what else. She kissed her mother's cheek, squeezed her father's shoulder, and headed toward her bedroom. Then she stopped. "Dad, did you buy something at that storage auction?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Lynn. "We did, but it's complicated." Katie came back into the kitchen, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. Complicated how? So they told her. They showed her the photographs, explained about James Morrison and his father and mother, about the 40-year collection and the auto-pay failure and the money in the briefcase. They told her about borrowing $3,000 and renting a new storage unit and their desperate search for a man who'd lost everything through no fault of his own. Katie listened without interrupting. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I have a friend from nursing school, Jenny Chen. Yeah, same last name, no relation. She works in medical records at Stanford Hospital. If James Morrison's father was treated there in the 90s. "There might be contact information," Marcus briefed, "emergency contact numbers, next of kin." "It's a long shot," Katie warned, "and technically, I'm not supposed to ask her to look up patient records without proper authorization, but if I explain the situation." She pulled out her phone and started texting. Marcus felt something in his chest loosen, just a little. They weren't alone in this anymore. His daughter, who'd already given them so much, was willing to give more, not money this time, but help, connections, her own network. 2 days later, Katie came home with an address scrawled on a Post-it note. Jenny came through. Thomas Morrison was treated at Stanford in 2006 and 2007. The emergency contact listed was James Morrison, and there's an address in Palo Alto. Marcus took the Post-it with trembling hands. Did she say if it's current? "The records are from 2007, Katie said gently, "so probably not, but it's a starting point." The next morning, Marcus and Lynn took a Greyhound bus to Palo Alto. The address led them to an apartment complex that had clearly seen better days. They climbed to the 3rd floor, found number 317, and knocked. A young woman answered, maybe 30, with a baby on her hip and a toddler clinging to her leg. "Yes?" "I'm sorry to bother you," Marcus said. "We're looking for James Morrison. Does he live here?" The woman frowned. "No one by that name here. We moved in about 3 years ago." "Do you know where the previous tenant went?" "No idea." "The landlord might know, but he's not exactly." She glanced at the peeling paint on the doorframe. "He's not exactly helpful. Good luck, though." They found the landlord's office on the 1st floor. The man behind the desk was in his 60s, overweight, watching a game show on a small TV. He barely looked up when they entered. "We're looking for a former tenant," Marcus said. "James Morrison. He lived in Unit 317 until about 3 years ago." "I don't give out tenant information." "Please, it's important. We have something that belongs to him." The landlord finally looked at them, his eyes sweeping over their worn clothes, Lynn's second-hand purse, Marcus's carefully repaired shoes. "You two look like you need whatever you got more than whoever you're looking for. Why don't you just keep it?" Marcus felt anger flare in his chest. Because it's not ours, because he spent 20 years preserving it, because it matters. Something in his tone must have gotten through, because the landlord sighed and turned to his computer. Morrison, James. Yeah, he lived here from 2004 to 2022, left no forwarding address. Paid up through the end of his lease, though, which is more than I can say for most. 2022? Lynn said. That's recent. He must still be in the area. The landlord shrugged. Good luck finding him. Half the people in this city are one rent increase away from disappearing. They spent the rest of the day canvassing the neighborhood, showing James's photo to local business owners, asking if anyone remembered him. A few people thought he looked familiar, but no one knew where he'd gone. By evening, they were back on the Greyhound, exhausted and discouraged. We're not giving up, Lynn said, as the bus pulled onto the highway. But she sounded less certain now. Back in Stockton, Marcus threw himself into the search with renewed desperation. He contacted the DMV. They needed a formal request he couldn't make. He tried voter registration records, outdated or inaccessible. He even went to the Palo Alto police station to file what he hoped might be a missing persons report, but the officer just looked at him with pity and explained that James Morrison wasn't missing. He'd just moved, and that wasn't a police matter. Weeks passed. Marcus got a part-time job stocking shelves at a grocery store, minimum wage, barely enough to cover the storage unit rental and pay Katie back a little. Lynn took shifts at a dry cleaner, pressing clothes until her hands cramped. They were back to the same grinding poverty they'd been in before the auction, except now they had $90 less each month and a storage unit full of someone else's history. At night, Marcus would lie awake on Katie's couch and wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. The briefcase still sat in the storage unit, minus the $3,000 they borrowed. That money could have transformed their lives. Instead, they'd chosen to honor a stranger's memory. And for what? They were no closer to finding James Morrison than they'd been on day one. Maybe we should cut our losses, he said to Lynn one night in November. They'd been searching for nearly 2 months. Maybe we should take what's left of the money and… No, Lynn's voice cut through the darkness. We made a promise, not to James, he doesn't even know we exist, but to ourselves. We promised we'd do the right thing. The right thing is bankrupting us. We were already bankrupt, Marcus. This gives us something bankruptcy can't take away. It gives us our dignity. Marcus wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because she was right. The search had given them purpose again, a reason to get up in the morning beyond just surviving. It had reminded them that they were still capable of choosing righteousness over convenience. In a strange way, hunting for James Morrison had saved them as much as the money could have. In December, Marcus got a break. He'd been thinking about the business card, Morrison Digital Solutions, and decided to search for it one more time, digging deeper into business registration databases at the library. And there, buried in archived records, he found something. Morrison Digital Solutions had been registered in 2015, had operated for 6 years, and had been dissolved in 2021. But the dissolution paperwork listed a lawyer's name as the contact, Patricia Okoro, with an office in San Francisco. Marcus called the office the next day. The receptionist was professional but guarded. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "I have property that belongs to one of her former clients, James Morrison. It's urgent that I reach him." "I'll pass along the message. Can I have your contact information?" Marcus left Katie's phone number. They couldn't afford a cell phone, and waited. Days passed with no response. Christmas came and went, a quiet affair at Katie's apartment with a small tree and cheaper gifts. They'd given Katie money for rent instead of presents, and she'd cried and hugged them both and said they didn't have to, but Marcus had insisted. They'd taken $3,000 from James Morrison. The least they could do was reduce the burden on their daughter. On December 28th, Katie's phone rang. It was Patricia Okoro. "Mr. Chen, you left a message about James Morrison." Marcus's heart raced. "Yes, I have some things that belong to him, a storage unit full of his family's possessions. It's a long story, but…" "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen." The lawyer's voice was careful, measured. "I can't give out my client's contact information, But if you'd like to give me your details, I can pass them along to him. Can you at least tell me if he's all right, if he's still in California? A long pause. Then, I can tell you that Mr. Morrison is dealing with some difficulties at the moment. I'm not sure he's in a position to respond to your message. Difficulties. The word hung in the air, ominous and vague. Marcus pressed on. Miss Okoro, I have roughly $17,000 of his money, plus his entire family history, his father's photographs, his mother's possessions, 40 years of memories. I've been trying to find him for months. If he's in trouble, maybe this could help. Another pause, longer this time. Give me 24 hours. I'll see what I can do. The next day, Patricia Okoro called back. Mr. Morrison has agreed to meet with you, but I need to warn you, he's not in good shape. He's currently living in transitional housing in Oakland. He lost his job 8 months ago, and things spiraled from there. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Transitional housing? He's homeless, Mr. Chen, or was. He's in a program now, trying to get back on his feet, but it's been rough. The irony was crushing. While Marcus had been searching for James Morrison, assuming the man was living a comfortable life somewhere, James had been sliding into the same poverty that Marcus knew too well. The man who'd spent 20 years buying back his childhood home had lost everything again. They arranged to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop in downtown Oakland. Marcus and Lynn took the BART, which required borrowing money from Katie for the fare. They arrived early, ordered 2 small coffees they couldn't afford, and waited at a corner table. James Morrison walked in 15 minutes late. Marcus recognized him immediately from the photographs, though the years and hardship had carved deep lines into his face. He was thin, almost gaunt, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit and carrying a backpack that looked like it held everything he owned. His eyes swept the coffee shop nervously until they landed on Marcus and Lynn, the only elderly Asian couple present. He walked over slowly, and Marcus stood up, extending his hand. "Mr. Morrison? Call me James." His handshake was weak, his palm clammy. He glanced at Lynn, then back at Marcus. "Patricia said you have something that belongs to me?" They sat down, and Marcus pulled out his phone. Katie's old phone, actually, which had given him for this meeting. He'd loaded it with photos of the storage unit contents, the photographs, the briefcase, everything. "I bought your storage unit at an auction in September," Marcus said, sliding the phone across the table. "Unit 847 at Sacramento Self-Storage." James stared at the phone. His face went white. That was on autopay. I paid through 2035. "The autopay failed," Lynn said gently. "The storage company tried to contact you, but—" "I changed addresses." James' voice was barely a whisper. He was scrolling through the photos on the phone, his hands shaking. "I changed addresses 6 times in the last year. I never updated my information with them. Oh my God, it's gone. It's all gone." "No." Marcus reached across the table, stopped his scrolling. "It's not gone. We moved it. We put everything into a new storage unit. It's all there. Every photograph, every letter, every single thing your father saved. It's safe." James looked up, tears streaming down his face. You saved it?" "We couldn't throw it away," Lynn said. "Not after we saw what it meant. Not after we read your father's letters." James put his head in his hands and wept. They sat there in the coffee shop, 2 elderly strangers and a broken man, while other patrons glanced over and looked away quickly, uncomfortable with such raw emotion. Marcus wanted to put his hand on James' shoulder, to offer comfort, but he didn't know if it would be welcome. So he just sat there, waiting. Finally, James lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face blotchy. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do that? You bought the unit. Everything in it was legally yours. You could have just kept it all." Marcus pulled out the envelope marked "Borrowed from J. Morrison." He set it on the table between them. There was money. "About $20,000. We borrowed $3,000 to rent a new storage unit and search for you. The rest is still there, untouched. This envelope documents what we took and why." James stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "You found $20,000? And you're giving it back?" "It's not ours," Lynn said simply. "But you—" James looked at them, really looked at them for the first time. He saw their worn clothes, their tired faces, the weight of poverty they carried. "You need it. I can see that you need it." Marcus nodded. "We do, but we need to look at ourselves in the mirror more." James picked up the envelope with trembling hands, opened it, and read Marcus's careful documentation of every dollar spent: storage unit rental, bus fares, the $50 bribe to the storage facility manager. At the bottom, Marcus had written, "Total borrowed, $3,000. Will repay with 5% interest when able. M. Chen." "You're not going to repay me," James said. His voice was firmer now, some strength returning. "You're not going to repay me because you saved my entire family. Do you understand that? You saved 40 years of memories. You saved my father's letters. You saved photographs of my mother that I'll never be able to replace. The money, I can make that back. The memories?" He shook his head. "Those are irreplaceable." "Your father wrote in one of his letters that you changed his life," Marcus said, "that loving you and fighting for you was the privilege of his life. We read that, and we understood. Because our daughter has done the same for us. She sacrificed her own comfort to keep us afloat. So we know what it means when someone you love gives everything, and we couldn't just throw that away like it meant nothing." James was crying again, but quietly now. "Can I ask you something? How much do you need? How much would change your life?" Marcus shook his head. "That's not why we're here." "I know, but I'm asking anyway." "You're living on your daughter's couch, aren't you? And you're both working minimum wage jobs to pay for storage of my family's possessions. How much would it take to get you into your own place, to relieve some of the burden on your daughter?" Lynn spoke up. "First and last month's rent on a small apartment, maybe $5,000. But James, we're not asking." "I'm not offering charity," James interrupted. "I'm offering fairness. You spent months searching for me. You spent money you didn't have. You preserved something that meant everything to me. The money in that briefcase was my father's emergency fund. He saved it for decades, nickel and dime, because he wanted to make sure we'd never be completely desperate. And then he died, and I inherited it, and I put it in storage because I couldn't stand to spend it. It felt like letting go of him." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But Dad would have wanted it used, not hoarded. He'd have wanted it to help someone who needed it, someone who understood what it meant to fight for your family. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take $10,000 from that briefcase. You're going to get yourselves an apartment. You're going to give your daughter her life back. And in return, you're going to help me move everything from your storage unit to mine." "James," Marcus started. "Please," the word came out like a prayer. "Please let me do this. You gave me back my family. Let me help yours." Marcus looked at Lynn. She had tears in her eyes, but she nodded. They'd given James his memories. They could accept this gift in return. "Okay," Marcus said quietly. "Okay." They spent the next 3 weeks organizing the move. James had gotten a job through his transitional housing program. Data entry, not much, but it was a start. With the money from the briefcase, he rented a small storage unit of his own and slowly started rebuilding his life. Marcus and Lynn found a studio apartment in Stockton. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. The day they signed the lease, Katie cried with relief. "I love you both," she said, hugging them tight. "But I was so worried. About you, about me, about all of us. This is breathing room." On a cold January Saturday, they met James at their rented storage unit. He brought boxes and blankets and spent hours carefully packing his family's history. Marcus and Lynn helped, handling each photograph with reverence, wrapping each frame in bubble wrap. They worked mostly in silence, but it felt comfortable, companionable. When they got to the letters Thomas had written, James sat down on the concrete floor and read them. Some Marcus had seen before. Others were new, private, meant only for James. Marcus and Lynn stepped outside to give him space, and when James emerged 20 minutes later, his eyes were red, but his face was peaceful. "Thank you," he said, "for reading them too, for understanding." "Your father loved you very much," Lynn said. "He did." James looked back at the boxes, now neatly stacked and ready to transport. "They both did. I spent so many years feeling guilty about the medical bills, about the debt, about everything they sacrificed. But Dad's letters, he wanted me to know that loving me wasn't a burden. It was a gift." They loaded everything into a U-Haul James had rented and drove to his new storage unit in Oakland. As they unloaded the boxes, James told them his story. The job loss, the depression, the cascade of missed payments and lost opportunities that had led to homelessness. It was a story Marcus understood too well. Different circumstances, but the same downward spiral, the same terror of falling and not being able to get back up. "I'm climbing out now," James said as they stacked the last box. "It's slow, but I'm climbing." "You will," Lynn assured him. "Your father believed you were a fighter. So do we." When everything was secured, they stood outside the storage unit, looking at the closed door that now protected 40 years of family history. James locked it, pocketed the key, and turned to face them. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "I keep trying to find words, but they all sound inadequate." "You already thanked us," Marcus said. "You helped us get back on our feet. That's more than thanks. That's grace." James smiled, a genuine smile that made him look younger, less burdened. "Maybe we helped each other. Maybe that's how it's supposed to work." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I want you to have this. Don't open it now. Wait until you get home. And don't argue with me about it." He held up a hand to forestall Marcus's protest. "You spent months taking care of my family's memory. This is me taking care of you." Marcus took the envelope, heavy and sealed. He wanted to refuse, but something in James's expression stopped him. This was important to the man, this giving. After months of losing everything, James needed to be in a position to help someone else. Refusing would take that away from him. "Thank you," Marcus said. They parted ways in the parking lot, exchanging phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. James hugged them both. Real hugs, the kind between people who'd been through something together. Then he climbed into the U-Haul and drove away. And Marcus and Lynn stood watching until he was out of sight. On the BART home, Lynn looked at the envelope. "What do you think it is?" "More money, probably. He's stubborn about repaying debts he doesn't actually owe." But when they got home to their small studio apartment, still barely furnished, but theirs, blessedly theirs, and opened the envelope, they found something unexpected. Yes, there was money, $5,000, which made Marcus's breath catch. But there was also a letter, handwritten on nice paper. "Dear Marcus and Lynn, by the time you read this, my family's history will be safely stored again, and I'll be on my way to rebuilding my life. Both of those things are possible because of you. The money in this envelope is not payment. Payment implies a transaction, and what you did can't be reduced to a transaction. You didn't just preserve my family's possessions. You reminded me that there are still people in this world who choose integrity over convenience, who do the right thing even when it costs them everything. I've spent the last year feeling like I'd lost my way, like I'd somehow betrayed my parents' memory by ending up homeless and broken. But meeting you showed me that what my parents taught me, what they modeled in every photograph, every sacrifice, every choice they made, still matters. It still has value. And as long as there are people like you in the world, their legacy isn't just preserved in boxes, it's alive. The money is for whatever you need, an emergency fund, a fresh start, security for your daughter. You decide. Use it without guilt because it's coming from a place of profound gratitude. Stay in touch, please. I want to know how your story continues. With deep respect and friendship, James Morrison. P.S. My father used to say that life is a series of storage units, places where we keep what we can't carry but refuse to let go of. Some people abandon theirs. Some people lose track of the payment. And some people, like you, find someone else's forgotten treasures and choose to protect them, even at great cost to themselves. Thank you for being the kind of people who protect what others abandon. The world needs more of you. Lynn was crying openly now. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his hands unsteady. $5,000 plus the $10,000 James had already insisted they take. $15,000 total from the original $20,000. They'd found it, protected it, spent months hunting for its owner, and now they had more than they'd started with. Not because they'd kept what wasn't theirs, but because they'd given it back. Katie came over later that evening with takeout dinner, her treat, she insisted. They showed her the letter, and she read it twice, then looked at her parents with shining eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Not because you got the money back, because you did the hard thing. Because you taught me that the hard thing is usually the right thing." They ate dinner together in the tiny studio apartment, talking about James Morrison and his parents, about storage units and the things people leave behind, about the strange and beautiful ways that lives intersect. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten. Not because they had money, though that certainly helped, but because they'd faced a moral test and passed it. Because they'd chosen the kind of people they wanted to be, even when it was expensive and difficult. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus got up and stood by the window of their apartment. Outside, Stockton spread out under sodium lights, a city full of struggling people trying to hold on. Somewhere in Oakland, James Morrison was probably awake too, thinking about his parents, about the photographs now safely stored, about second chances and the long road back from rock bottom. Marcus thought about his own father, who died 20 years ago without ever owning his own home, who'd worked until his body gave out and had still died in debt. His father had never had a storage unit, never had enough possessions to need one. Everything he owned had fit in 2 suitcases. But he'd left something more valuable than possessions. He'd left the example of how to live with integrity. And Marcus had carried that forward, had protected it, even when it cost him. And now he was passing it to Katie, and she would pass it to her children someday. That was the real storage unit, Marcus thought. Not the metal boxes where you kept furniture and photographs, but the choices you made that echoed through generations. Lynn came up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" "About how we almost kept that money. About how close I came to choosing wrong. But you didn't. Because of you. You wouldn't let me." She rested her head against his back. "We saved each other. That's what married people do. We keep each other honest." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, and Marcus thought about James Morrison's father taking 40 years of photographs, never knowing that decades later they'd be discovered by strangers who would choose to honor rather than exploit his memory. He thought about the chain of events that had led him to Unit 847, to that briefcase full of cash, to the moral crossroads that had defined the last 4 months of his life. "I want to stay in touch with him," Marcus said. "With James. I want to know how his story turns out." "Me too," Lynn agreed. "He's family now, in a way. Not by blood, but by choice. Family by choice." Marcus liked that. It meant something, having gone through this with James, having helped each other when neither of them had much to give. It was the kind of connection that mattered more than blood or obligation. It was the kind of connection forged in the fire of shared struggle and mutual respect. Over the next few months, Marcus and Lynn settled into their new life. The studio apartment wasn't much, but it was theirs. Marcus kept his job at the grocery store and was eventually promoted to assistant manager. Lynn continued at the dry cleaner and discovered she enjoyed the work, found satisfaction in taking something wrinkled and stained and making it crisp and clean again. They put most of the money from James into savings, keeping it as an emergency fund, the same way his father had intended. They heard from James every few weeks. He'd gotten a better job, was working in IT for a nonprofit. He'd found a small apartment of his own, moved out of transitional housing. He sent them pictures of his new place, small but clean, the walls decorated with framed photographs from his father's collection. The picture he sent of his bedroom showed the final photo, James in front of his reclaimed childhood home hanging above the bed. "I look at it every morning," he wrote in an email. "It reminds me that recovery is possible, that you can lose everything and still find your way back." In May, James invited them to visit him in Oakland. They took the BART over on a Saturday, and